the Electoral Reform Panel, and I'm delighted that that Advocate Sizani is going to be here to talk around the new panel's work, and how people can plug into the work that the panel is doing. So, of course, to provide just some context, the Electoral Reform, I'll get the full name correct just now, but the Electoral Reform Panel comes out of the process of electoral reform that was triggered by the New Nation Movement judgment in June of 2020. The Constitutional Court made a ruling that the Electoral Act of 1998 was unconstitutional insofar as it restricted people from insofar as it restricted people from contesting for election without being a member of a political party. The Electoral Act of 1998, so the original Electoral Act, only accommodated political parties as contestants of an election at national or provincial level, and an organization called the New Nation Movement and others took a case initially to the Western Cape High Court and then to the Constitutional Court, basically saying that a person should not have to join a political party in order to become a member of parliament or a member of a provincial legislature. They said that it should be possible to represent a constituency in parliament or in a legislature without joining a political party. The Constitutional Court found for them and found that that was correct, that the Electoral Act violated the Section 19 on political rights in the Bill of Rights, as well as Section 18 on the right of association. And so that triggered a process of electoral reform, of amending the Electoral Act in order to accommodate individuals or independent candidates to be able to contest in the elections. And there's all sorts of, long story of how that process went. There was a ministerial advisory committee that I sat on with some of the people that are on the call, that advised the minister on how to amend the Electoral Act, the Minister of Home Affairs at the time, Minister Ntuli, and gave two options basically of how it could be possible to have how the Electoral Act could be amended to enable independent candidates to contest the elections. In the process of that amendment, there were a number of challenges that were brought against the way that Parliament was approaching the amendment of the Electoral Act, and that culminated when the final version of the Electoral Amendment Act was being developed by the National Council of Provinces, that culminated in a compromise position that said, well, these amendments will be used and they'll apply to the 2024 election, but there will be a electoral reform advisory panel established within the Electoral Amendment Act to open up a much broader discussion and debate on electoral reform in order to accommodate some of the concerns about the way in which the Electoral Act was amended, but also to open a much bigger societal conversation about what kind of electoral system we want to carry us forward in this next stage of our democracy. And so that is how we have gotten here, and that's why we're here. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have. I see Advocate Sizani is on the call now as well. It's lovely to be with you, sir, and really, really looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mbethe, and I apologize. I was having some network issues, but I did want to just start by saying, obviously, thank you to everyone who's joined us. And I know that people are also streaming on Facebook and other places. And I think for us as a civil society organization, the reason that we wanted to have both Dr. Mbethe and the advocates is because a lot of the work that we've been doing on the ground shows that South Africans are finally at a stage where they are really grappling with whether or not our electoral system gives us the best in terms of accountability, in terms of reform, and in terms of being able to participate in our politics as much as we can. And so we wanted to have two people that are intimately involved with this to come and unpack this discussion for us in a way that most South Africans could then understand. So thank you very much both to Dr. Mbethe and to the advocates for coming. And just by way of brief introduction, obviously, Advocate Richard Sizani has a very rich history in our country, being at the forefront of many different things. And for his sins has now been asked to chair the Electoral Reform Panel, which I think is the third that we've had in the country. And each one of them are named after the chairpersons that chair them. And I know the previous two, we haven't been able to implement everything, and I'm hoping that the Sizani report will be the one where we see some real change. And then, of course, Dr. Mbethe, who needs very little introduction to those of us who follow politics. She is a lecturer at the University of Pretoria, but also very well renowned for her multidisciplinary work in both political science, general politics. She sits on a number of boards, and she does a lot of analysis work, I think, to really try and get the country to talk and understand a lot of the jargon-filled arena of politics. So we're very glad to have both of you. It's going to be a conversation because I don't want to really make it too prescriptive, because these are one of those conversations where we need to give people an understanding of where we've come, where we are, and what needs to be done. So I know Dr. Mbethe has touched a little bit on how we came to this, but Advocate, maybe you can tell us what is different from your particular panel versus the other ones, and what is it exactly that you are supposed to be doing? What have you been tasked to do in this particular panel?
Thank you very much, Ms. Ntuli. Can you hear me? Okay. No, I mean, there is actually quite a big, vast difference between us and the previous panels. The first thing is that given the background that Dr. Mbethe has already given of the independents wanting to participate and so on, we were set up in May this year. What is it different about us is our terms of reference. It's very important. We are not asked to actually recommend a particular model of electoral system to Parliament. What Parliament has said, it has said, go out there, ask why, how, and whether the current electoral system should be changed, reformed, or even replaced. And doing that, you'll use the methodology both of submissions, and you can also use public hearings. What you must do, you must then collate the models that are coming out of those submissions and give us which models are these, what are the reasons for these models, what are the legal and constitutional implications of these models, what are the financial implications of these models, what are the advantages and disadvantages of these models. But bear in mind, they said, we are not even asking you to basically give us only those that are constitutional. You can also give us those that are certified by your lawyers to be unconstitutional. We will decide if we want to do that. Even yourselves as a panel, if you disagree among yourselves, there should be no minority or majority report. You should write the views of all those people that they've put them down, and you bring them up to us. We will make the decision and do the electoral design.
Great. And I mean, like I said, there's been two panels before, and maybe Dr. Mbethe, you can come in here. And I think the one that probably most people are aware of was the Van Zyl Slabbert report, which did actually give some recommendations on what had been the minority and the majority views. Why did we not take those seriously, or why did we not execute them when they came out? Was it just a a period of South Africans' time, or why have we had this conversation since basically the beginning of our constitution, but haven't actually done anything about it? And do you think that perhaps political parties, on the other side, of course, being part of parliament who would have to vote this in, have had an oversized effect on how we've seen this happen?
Thanks, Mbali, for that question. I think the first thing to clarify is that the current panel is the only one that is established in statute. It is established in law, a clause in the Electoral Amendment Act of 2023. And so that, I think, is the biggest difference between the current panel and the previous ones. The committee, the Ministerial Advisory Committee that was established in February of 2021 to advise the Minister of Home Affairs on the different options for implementing the Constitutional Court judgment on, to enable independent candidates to contest in the next elections, which was the 2024 elections, was very different from the previous panel, the one before it, which is the Fantail Slabbert one, which I will turn to shortly, and the current panel, in that it had far kind of looser parameters, I think, than the others, and also it was a committee established to advise the minister, but had no broader kind of mandate from Parliament, for example, unlike the current committee, unlike the current panel that is here now. It also had a far shorter period to work. It was 4 months from February of 2021, and then the report was submitted in June of 2021. And so its work, the time that it worked for, what it was set up to do, was far more constricted, I think, than what we have with the current panel. And then speak about then the one that everybody knows and speaks about, which is what we call the Slabbert Commission, but it was the Electoral Task Team that was established in 2002 by Cabinet in order to draft new electoral legislation that was required by the Constitution. So you will recall that, or people who don't know on the call, I will explain that in the 1994 election happened in terms of an interim constitution, the 1993 interim constitution, which included the electoral system that would be used in 1993, which was a closed list proportional representation system for both national and provincial elections. There would be 400 seats in Parliament, and there'd be 2 tiers of seats. One tier, 200 of them, would be considered regional seats, that would be seats to represent, so that the people who would occupy those seats would come off lists from parties that represented all 9 provinces, or the populations of all 9 provinces proportionally. And then the other 200 would be what we call compensatory national seats that would come from national lists that all of the parties would devise. So it was this 2-tiered closed list PR system that was going to be used in 1994. The understanding, though, was that this electoral system may not be the electoral system that we use forever and ever. It was used in 1994 because it is a very inclusive system. It was relatively easy to understand because you just vote, everybody votes on the same ballot paper nationally, and you're just voting for a party, and that the results would be relatively easy to explain to people and to understand, because the proportion of votes that you get is the proportion of seats that you get in the National Assembly. When the final constitution was then concluded in 1996, it did not stipulate a different electoral system or more permanent electoral system for South Africa. The electoral system is included in the 1996 Constitution in the schedule that has transitional arrangements, and the understanding was that it would be used for the 1999 election, but that Parliament would have the responsibility to develop a electoral system for South Africa and to codify it in law, to come up with a law that would then be an act that would govern the electoral system. And this was done in 1998 with the electoral with the Electoral Act, and that kept the same electoral system that we'd used in 1994. Now, in 2002, the then Minister of Home Affairs, the late Mangosuthu Buthelezi, went to Cabinet with a proposal to say, actually, we do need to figure out this electoral system thing. And we do need to resolve this part of our transition. It was an unfinished part of the transition process. And so a task team was set up, chaired by the late Frederick van Zyl Slabbert, and with members from different sectors of society, and that was tasked with identifying the constitutional parameters, looking at South Africa's context, engaging widely with the society, with parties, with all other relevant stakeholders, in order to come up with specific proposals to identify a preferable electoral system for South Africa. This committee came up with two proposals. It couldn't find agreement on which one to take, and the one was to change the system into a multi-member constitutional. A multi-member constituency-based system that would have 69 constituencies, and so 300 of the seats would be selected from the 69 constituencies, a kind of direct election, and 100 of them would be through a closed list PR. The other opinion of the Van Zyl Slabbert Commission was to say, actually, there's no need to change the electoral system at all. This report was submitted to Cabinet, and Cabinet chose to go with the option that actually let's keep this electoral system. The report was submitted in 2003, and the next election was 2004. So the understanding was that actually too little time to do the changes, but also there was no broad public discussion about it, but the decision was to continue with the electoral system as we currently have it.
Yeah, and I think that's important that you touch on the fact that, one, the status quo was decided to be stuck to, but also the idea of public participation at that particular point perhaps wasn't as important as it is now, which is why I want to ask you, advocates, firstly, I think between 2003 and where we find ourselves as a country now, lots has changed. We also have a far more cynical, I think, citizenry in terms of trusting some of our institutions. So could you give us an idea of how your panel was firstly constituted and who the members are? And then secondly, what is the public participation element of this that citizens should actually find themselves engaged with, and what do they need to do to be able to give contributions, and why is that important? Sorry, I think people are joining us from the other links.
Okay.
Got the
as you have indicated, basically, the panel is established by Section 23 of the Electoral Amendment Act of 2023. It was basically part of the process of including the independent candidates. So it is established by act, as the doctor is saying, and it was supposed, of course, now, because that's what they actually said, Mbali, the parliamentarians, that the time was too short between 2021 and the 2024 elections for them to have a public hearings and change all the legislation to get a new system. So we're given now that task to say after the elections, then take a year and do these public hearings and public submissions, so that we are able to make a proposal by 2025, which then will work in 2029. So that is why we were given that task, and to do the consultation. It was also to give enough time. And this time, it was again to check people, because when they were doing the issue relating to independence, they actually did find that there were quite a number of people who were unhappy about the current system. There was a lot of criticism. So that's why now they wanted to say, go and listen to this criticism. Come and hear what are they saying should be the solutions to them, and then check if they have good grounds, check if they are financially sound, check if they are legally sound, and also check if they can work in our country. As a panel, we have come out looking at a number of proposals. We've come out with some principles. These principles we've come out with are basically trying to design a system that will work for the country. We have looked at one of the principles, I think, especially during the SLAPET period, was very important, the one of inclusivity, to ensure that it's non-racial society, it's a multi-party democracy, and everybody's in. So the principle of inclusivity is there. Responsiveness is still one of the principles. Of course, now there is one principle that we feel is one of the other principles. There's no principle that is superior than the other. This principle of accountability, where people are saying, we want to know our MP, we want to know our councillor in the local government sense, and we want to be able to recall them, we want to be able to call them, and we want to be able to hold them accountable. That is one of the things. Others, of course, have raised the issues that we're really tired of the control of party bosses who are dominating this system and are able even to undermine parliament, are able even to change lists of people that were in the list like that. So our situation, of course, is not to decide and answer those questions, is to give air to them, listen to what people are saying, and then on the basis of that, try to find some models that can work on those things. And the principles, of course, must still bear in mind the nature and character of the country. That is still a developing country, so it must be a simple system. We have put in an important principle that it should be a functional and manageable system. Because we have seen in places like Congo, for instance, where the ballot paper is about 300 pages. So we still need to come out with a simple system that is functional and that is affordable, but that is modern, but that is also addresses the issues of the people. So that is really what our work is about, and that is what is driving the work of this panel.
Thank you, advocates, and I'm going to go to Dr. Mbethe just now, but I think still just importantly, just very briefly, if you can tell us who actually is the panel, because one of the things that we have found on the ground when we've been talking to people is that because there's such a distrust, they wonder, you know, is Advocate Sizani, or is Advocate Lagola, or is Dr. Sutcliffe, are these people that already have you know, their own issues? How was the panel constituted? Because I think that also does a lot of work to make people feel that they can trust that their views are going to be taken seriously, and that this is a panel that is completely independent. So I think that's the one. And then the second, also just to touch a little bit on how people should be giving you these kinds of submissions. And is it supposed to be long? Must they be academic in their writing? Can it be short? Can it be just a paragraph about more accountability? Can it say that I want to directly, you know, elect my president? How is the panel expecting those particular submissions to also look like?
Well, the composition of the panel, I think was really a function of Parliament and the function of the composition of Parliament. One important point that we have actually learned is that the Portfolio Committee or the Sixth Parliament felt it needed to get people who are experienced or have some expertise in the areas of law, constitutional law, especially people who are academics, people who have knowledge of administering and managing elections. They also wanted to avoid people who have already taken quite strong sides. That's why you would find that there was a query a little bit about including, for instance, civil society. It was felt that they must participate, and we have been instructed also to work with them quite closely. But it was felt we don't want people who are championing one view. We want people who are going to be open and we're going to bring those views. There has been a criticism, of course, that we are a bit old, but indeed, really, we do have some young people among ourselves. For instance, one of our doctors, Dr. Skuman, is about 30 years old, but and the team, it is quite representative. We have myself, we have Advocate Pensi Tlakula, we have Matsi Muki, we have Tom Dlamini, we have Dr. Michael Sutcliffe, we have Mr. Simon Mabulo, we have Mr. Michael Hendrikse, we have Dr. Norman Duplessis, we've got Dr. Albertus Kuman. It is true some of these people have been with the IEC, but in dealing with this system, unfortunately, and as we have noticed now, practicality is one of the important things. Let's assume I met I met Mr. Maimane today, and they raised the issue of the people of the IEC are not going to influence us. But but our view is that the information and the data largely we need is with the IEC. 2019 elections, 2024 elections, and so on, and others. And Mr. Maimane, of course, was punting again something closer to the Slabet proposal. But the point is, if, for instance, we want multi-member constituencies, you're certainly going to need information to know how many people are in that constituency and how many members can they be 3, can they be 4, depending on the numbers. So the IEC is not really influencing us or dominating us. It is providing us the actual information, assuming even if you were going to do constituencies, if you were going to do that, you certainly would need to see how do you carve them and what information to use, what happened in the previous things, and so on. And we do get that information. But as I've indicated, our proposals will be open and will be clear and will be decided by Parliament.
Thank you. And I mean, I'm also obviously acting as a devil's advocate in this conversation. Okay. I know very much the work that yourself and the panel and the members do. Dr. Mbethe, I suppose I want to ask you 2 questions here. One, why do you think that we've had such a lack of public participation in these particular processes before? Where are we now as a society? Is this something that you think that people believe will actually work? And then secondly, the proposals that we have seen before have been things like first past the post or multi-member constituencies. And I'm not going to ask you to say which you think is better, but maybe just to give a sense for people, just a couple of different types of electoral reforms that we might see ourselves, because I think people don't understand the significance of what this panel has to do, what they're going to recommend, and what happens after the public hearings is that one day we're going to wake up after the 2029 elections, and we might have a completely different situation in terms of what our political terrain looks like. And that will be as a result of what we decide in this particular process. So if we say first past the post becomes the electoral system that we take. You might wake up in 2029 with one particular party being very dominant because they'll have more constituency members, whatever the case might be. But I don't think the average South African even understands what that means, what the jargon means, and what the significance will be. So I would love you to just give us your thoughts around those two things, and to package it in a way that I think many people will do. We've got quite a lot of people on this call, but I can see that we've also got quite a lot on our Facebook and Instagram feeds as well. So you're speaking to a broad audience of different political.
All right, I want to start by basically explain what is an electoral system. Because I feel like we're having these conversations, we talk about these things without really explaining what is it that we're actually talking about. And before even getting to that, I want to sort of have a base level agreement on what's democracy, right? So, I mean, the whole point is that in 1994, we became a democracy and non-racial, where everybody could participate in the democracy and could vote regardless of race, gender. If you were over 18, you could participate and you could vote in our democratic system. Now, democracy, government by the people, for the people, government of the people, by the people, for the people. And, you know, the kind of the ancient Greek idea of democracy was that every citizen in ancient Athens could participate in making decisions for how Athens was governed. Of course, the definition of citizenship was that you were male, you were an Athenian, you were born in Athens, and you had a certain amount of money. So it was a very constrained and restricted version of citizenship. It's difficult to have that kind of direct democracy when you've got more than 1,000 people or 2,000 people or 5,000 people that live in a place. And so our idea of democracy now is that government by the people is by representatives of the people. So it's an indirect relationship. It's an indirect form of government where the people choose their representatives that will govern on their behalf and in their interest. And that is a representative democracy, and that's what most democracies are in the world now. Some democracies have more direct bits than others. So like Switzerland uses a lot of like referendums and stuff, but generally we elect representatives to represent our interests in Parliament and to make laws on our behalf. And so the electoral system is how we do the choosing. How do you choose who represents you? What is the system that, how do you decide how votes are cast in an election? And how are the votes that are cast turned into power, into seats? So how do the votes that have all been cast then determine who actually wins an election, who wins a seat in a legislature? So that's I just want to clarify that that's what we're talking about an electoral system, right? And the important thing about it, and why it is an important thing to think about, and why we've heard quite a lot from Advocate Sizani about principles, is that the electoral system you choose will shape how you are represented. And so you want an electoral system that reflects what's important to the people of a country. The electoral system you choose will determine who it is that gets elected, how many seats a particular party will get or not. It determines whether it's parties that are elected or individuals. It determines whether some parts of a country are more represented than other parts of a country. So the US, which is having their election in 2 weeks, their electoral college system means that it doesn't necessarily matter what percentage of votes you can get. So Hillary Clinton in her election against Donald Trump got more of the popular vote than Trump did, but the spread of the vote across the different states in the US meant that she didn't win as many electoral college votes, and so she lost the election. So in another country, in France, let's say, Hillary Clinton would have won that election because their system uses different rules. And so I think it's an important point to just clarify what an electoral system is before we then have the discussion about public participation, because I think that part of the reason why there's been limited kind of public engagement with these questions is because it's quite complex, right? And so for a lot of people, you know, to understand what is actually at issue, what's the language to be using, all of that is challenging, right? And I think that we haven't had enough, or we haven't done enough work to explain to people what the conversation is actually about. The second thing is that previous electoral reform processes have worked with very, very tight time constraints. So the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission was established in 2002, around May, I think, or March or May, and then, you know, had about a year to, it submitted, it was initially actually meant to submit its report in like November of 2002, but ended up doing it in early 2003. But that was a year before the election. The next election of 2004. Same with the New Nation movement judgment and that process. And look, I do think that the Electoral Amendment Act, or the Electoral Amendment Bill, was introduced to Parliament far too late. So the court judgment was June of 2020. The bill was only introduced to Parliament in January of 2022. And the Constitutional Court had given Parliament 2 years to amend the Electoral Act. So the amendment bill was introduced introduced to Parliament 6 months before the deadline. And so that really limited the amount of public consultation that Parliament could do.
Yeah.
And it meant that there was actually very little of that could be done in the 6 months that Parliament had. But even when the Constitutional Court extended the deadline, you know, even more towards to November, December of 2022, there still wasn't enough time to do full public consultation. So the opportunity that there is with the current panel is that because it's established within an election year for the next election, that it should be possible to have far greater consultation about and to really get more debate within the public about how do we want to choose our representatives. And I want to just say something, and I'll end here around the principles, is that, you know, as Advocate Sizani said, the reason why we chose a closed list PR system in 1994 was that as a country that was coming from a very divided past, that was coming from immediate violence. I mean, like, you know, the period of 1990 to 1994 was the most violent in South African history.
Yeah.
You needed to have an electoral system that wouldn't create more division. You needed an electoral system that would contribute towards, you know, unifying the country and building up a single South Africa. So having a system that emphasized fairness, inclusivity, that emphasized simplicity to understand, was really important. And that's why a proportional system made sense in 1994. The big issue, and I think the big beat that people have had, whether they understand the electoral system or not, is that they feel, firstly, that they are distant from their representatives, so that they've got no direct relationship with the people that represent them because the representatives are chosen by political parties. but also that they feel like their issues of their constituency, of the place where they live, aren't represented by the people that are in parliament, and therefore also that they can't hold the members of parliament accountable for the decisions that they make. So this accountability piece, this accountability principle, is really, it seems to me, what is at issue here, and all the different variations and permutations of this discussion hinge around how do we ensure that we've got public representatives that are more accountable of people and that are more accessible to the people.
I mean, we've been in many forums together where we've really debated a lot of this stuff. So I'm always very happy when you bring in a lot of the voice that I can't, because I can't be political. And I was a politician for many, many years in KZN. And one of the things that I think is particularly important is that, and it can be political parties, and I don't want to be too political in my role as a facilitator, but when you have no ability as a citizen, or if you feel you have no ability as a citizen to be able to recall people that aren't representing you, what I think we're seeing in parts of the country is then a form of violence in particular that then gets meted out to that, which is not where we want to be at all as a society. And I'm very excited, and I take very seriously this particular work that the advocates and the panel has to do. And I think one of the things I also want to say is that the many people like Dr. Mbethe, myself, and others are very invested in helping the panel in any way that we can, because I think we are the ones who are going to bear the brunt of whatever we decide the Electoral Reform Panel puts to Parliament and what gets decided. But I mean, Advocate Sizani, just again, who can submit? How can they? Public participation is a big thing. So my understanding is that it can be prisoners, it can be people that you're going to go and hear public hearings to around different parts of the city. Is the panel having conversations around how we bring as much inclusivity in terms of just the submissions, first of all, and then the public hearings when you go out to tell people what is at stake and what is actually happening and what has been submitted? What does that process look like? And again, if you could just reiterate for people on the call and the ones that are watching on other platforms, how do people do this? I mean, I know that one of the ways is to go to your post office, which very few, I think, are still functional in South Africa, if I'm being honest. So email is probably going to be the one that you get the most of. But I mean, you can just tell us even the rationale around all of that. It might just be outdated legislation as part of the public participation of Home Affairs. But I think that that's something that people might be interested in hearing.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. I must just emphasize the point that you and Dr. Mbethe have raised, that unfortunately, even ourselves, we have not been given a role of electoral education. I don't know the IEC how much it does. So there is indeed the issue of that people really are not educated about electoral systems, even the models that come through. But what I found in some of the submissions that I've read, as you've both been explaining, is that people seem to be clear about what their problems are. They now understand that electoral system is not merely about creating a separate electoral system. It is actually part of a constitutional design. It's part of how the country is governed. It's part of about the quality of the people who are leading the country. It's a part about the quality of life of the people and the services that are rendered to them. So they actually look at the totality of the governance system, and that electoral design is part of constitutional design, and that the institutions are very important. So in some of the submissions, people have indicated that as is indicated, if the design is bad, and it allows certain people to have much more control over things, allows cliques to run the country and so on, that can lead to even civil war. But if you create and design a system that allows people to get their accountability, to choose their own people, to actually choose quality, and also have a say in the running of the affairs of the country, and to get legitimate institutions created, then you can see a country that is growing. You can see decisions that are taken in the interest of the people to deal with that. So it's very important. I must say that we are now in the middle of our submissions. Quite a number of submissions have come in through emails, and we are still collecting those that have been given by hand to Home Affairs, and those that are coming by our post office and so on. But it seems that the email that we have had has worked very well, which is ercp@dha.gov.za. Our website has also worked very well, www.dha.gov.za. And we are still trying to collect now those that have been handed over to the offices of Home Affairs that are near people, so that we can see it. I was happy with when I got the report, just briefly to say, I mean, already people have made submissions over 300 through emails. And we did get about already that were handed in our offices here in Pretoria, about 50 or so of them. And then we're expecting to hear what is coming in. And what is much more exciting about our process, Mbali, is that although we are getting now into the 31st of October period of closing submissions, and we're summarizing some of the submissions and creating a discussion document to actually consult people on, which is likely to be educative. It's where we are also going to need civil society, because that discussion document will have to tell people exactly what is mixed electoral system, what is this multi-member electoral system, what is first past post the system, what is a generally proportional system, and so on, what is the role of people who are overseas in the country, and what should be the role, for instance, of independence, and whether the constituencies that we have, or which basically are based on provinces, are good enough for independence, and so on. So those discussions we're going to hear from people, and we're not going to tell them what to do. And then from November to February, that is when we are going to do the public participation. And our public participation has been divided into 3 categories. We have had what we are calling stakeholders, the political parties, business, labor unions, social, civil society like you, coming and talking to us and discussing presentations that you have made that are strong enough. We are also then going to have a geographic spread, where we are going to go to the 9 provinces, where we are going to have one in the seat of the legislature, and we are going to look for another area in the rural areas, where then we are going to do a geographic consultation, where then we are going to talk to ordinary people and hear themselves. How do they feel about their governance? How do they feel about, do they know their MP? Is that what is important to them? Or is what important to them to ensure that they live in peace with each other, and there's no longer violence and fighting? So we are going to hear quite a lot of things. And in that period, we are actually going to be listening and talking to them. So from November to February 28th, we'll be actually doing both geographic participation and also dealing with stakeholders. So if you guys submit and you also want to discuss with us, we'll be available to do that.
Thank you so much. I think that is a good place for me to also open up a little bit for people to ask some questions. And I just, you know, for people that aren't aware, it's not just rural geographic areas. Prisoners are voters, people abroad are voters. So this is a really huge process that I think this panel is undertaking, and an important one, because all people in our society need to be able to have their voices heard. And I think that, again, we are presented now with a very big moment in our country where we've just come out of an election period, which has fundamentally changed, I think, the way that people psychologically have viewed what is possible. So it really is up also to us as citizens to participate in whatever capacities, whether it's civil society, academia, or in your individual capacities. We all have opinions about how our politics and our electoral systems should be run. And we talk about it all the time because politics is such an integral part of our fiber in this country. And so we don't want to miss this opportunity. We have until the 30th of October. And I just want to encourage everyone that's watching and listening, and I can see lots of messages coming up on the different platforms, to not just leave it here where we just have a dialogue and talk. Submit it and say what it is that you think, because all of them will be considered. And when the advocates and his panel take this out into public hearing stage, also go there and make sure that you are, again, having your voice heard, because I don't think that we've understood as South Africans after 1994, for some reason, that our democracy is only as strong as how much we participate in it. So I want to open it up to everyone. I don't know if Dr. Mbethe, if you wanted to say anything before I opened it up. I thought I saw you wanting to say something.
No, open it up, and then I will say my piece in response.
I will give you some closing remark time. Don't worry. Okay, so let me open it up. Sorry, Dr.
Pemba, can I say something?
Sure.
Can I say something, Pemba? My panelists, all of them are here. So can I give them their chance now to actually participate and answer the things? So I would like you to ask any of my panelists to respond or to make inputs on things as the discussion go on, but the panelists are present.
Thank you. That is really great to know. I mean, I wanted to ask Advocate Takula, because she was also on the last panel, sort of what she has thought about, and then I'll open it up, I promise. What she has thought about when she was on the first panel and the evolution of where we are now. I'm not sure if she's still on. I thought I saw her. Maybe she's dropped off for a while. Okay. So let me open it up to people that want to ask questions. We've already got 2 questions, and then I'll take some hands. So the first question, I think we've partly answered, but you can maybe give some comments, is how can South Africans be more effectively engaged in discussions around electoral reform to ensure that those reforms represent the interests of diverse communities? And then the second is, what checks and balances will be put in place to deter the mischief that Parliament involved with respect to the implementation timelines of the new nation movement's judgment? I think what that is sort of asking is, what checks and balances do we have to make sure that this panel isn't going to probably have to adhere to the stringent timelines that we've seen before that has happened. And then I saw a hand of someone that has gone down now, but maybe you can take those first 2 very briefly before I go to our people on the other networks. Sorry, and I have to look down on my phone because it's on other streaming platforms. But Dr. Mbethe, I'll start with you.
Yeah, and I will answer the question about the parliamentary mischief to preserve the Advocate Sizani's position. And look, I think there's a couple of things here. As I said earlier, I think that the delay in coming up with the amendment bill in the first place, I think, is what created those very constrained timelines. The Concord did provide 2 years. I think that 2 years was too short, because electoral reform, and those kinds of amendment is a hugely, complex thing. it's hugely time consuming. I mean, New Zealand, which had an actual full change in their electoral system, took nearly 10 years from the point at which they had a panel that had sat and then the first election that had the new electoral system. So so I think something that we do need to acknowledge is that changing an electoral system of a democracy, once that democracy is established, isn't an easy thing to do. And it's something that has a whole lot of conversation and deliberation that goes with it before it actually is done. And there aren't many democracies that have changed their electoral systems from what they originally were to something else. And so I think that is something to know, that it is usually a very, very complex thing. I think, though, around the parliamentary mischief is that because the bill was introduced to Parliament 6 months before the deadline, there was no ability, for Parliament to, and I do think that the previous parliamentary, the Home Affairs Committee, failed in some of its duties in not, pressing on the Home Affairs Minister to make sure that bill got introduced earlier, and really engaging with the issues of electoral reform even before there was a bill that was introduced to them. And so I think that the opportunity that we had here in answering how the checks and balances work is firstly to really engage do the public engagement, engage with the Electoral Reform Panel, with advocates, and take the opportunity to be on their case, and to know where they are, to send the submissions, but then also in this geographic traveling that they're going to be doing, find out where the public hearings are, the journalists who are on the call. You should be speaking to the Electoral Reform Panel every week to say, well, what's coming out from the places where you are, find out where they're going to be, and make sure that you've got, journalists or reporter there that can say, well, these are the questions that were being asked, these are the issues. And at the point then when the panel submits their report, and they've got a year to do it, but then Parliament's supposed to take this over, is that it's also up to us to then make sure that Parliament engages the report, and that they then do have the processes, the public hearings, and the and whatever. And I think that it'll be very, because our next local government election is in 2 years, that there is a risk that this discussion gets swallowed up by the preparations and the discussion, the concerns around the local government election. And I think that, we all have responsibility as citizens, if we want this to be taken seriously, to then keep the pressure up, basically, on the new Minister of Home Affairs, but then also on the parliamentary committee, once they get this report. So keep the pressure up on the panel, until they submit their report, and then do the same to the minister and to Parliament once the report is then handed over to them. And I think that is really a critical, it's something really critical. And to take, one of the things I really like is that there's going to be this sort of draft discussion document that the panel is developing. And I mean, this is something that we should be discussing in our churches, in school, if you have a book club, instead of reading a novel for one of your book club sessions, read the discussion document and talk about it. We need to be saying, because one of the things that accompanied the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission commissioned a report, commissioned a survey, to ask South Africans in general what they felt about the electoral system. Were they happy with it? whatever. We haven't had a similar kind of targeted survey, and that was in 2002. We haven't had a similar targeted survey in 22 years. I don't think that the panel currently has got the time to do that, but the point I'm trying to make is that we actually have aggregated very little about what are people's issues with the system, what is it that they like, what is it that they don't like, what is it that they want to change, what are the advantages and disadvantages. And I think that that discussion document is going to be a really great opportunity to kind of broaden the debate a bit more.
I agree. And certainly from the things that we got after the elections, is that people conflate the Electoral Reform Panel and what it can do with issues of things that happened in the election. So there needs to be a lot of conversation about that. And I think that will be helpful. We have a lot of questions, but advocates, I'll just give you two that I think are directed at you while people are sending them. The first is that people are asking, what is your relationship with the demarcation board, and if that is going to play an influence in, you know, how reform might happen, or even how your public hearings might happen. And then the second that they are asking is, are these public hearings going to be in every single town in South Africa? Which I mean, I don't think is possible, but I'll let you answer that. They basically are trying to ask is, will you come where I am, and I am in Mapumulo? So wondering if this is going to be an elite conversation that only happens in certain places, or if the panel will come everywhere so that they can listen to us. So those are the two. And I mean, I'm going to ask you and Dr. Mbethe to be as brief as possible so that I can get through as many questions as people are asking me. You are muted. You are mute.
We'll do as much as reasonably possible, but what is clear is that we will not go to every town and every shanty and everything. What is important for us is to ensure that we reach rural areas, we also reach urban areas to deal with people. The thing that I wanted to emphasize to you, Mbali, which is important and civil society must help us with. Unfortunately, if you look at the trend of information that is coming through, it shows that people do link voting with service delivery. And as through down since 1994, people now have decided, even this election, the figures are very disappointing, even for those who had actually registered, that they didn't actually vote, because they say we will not vote because we are not getting the service delivery thing. So it's one of the things that we need to educate people to say, actually by voting, they can vote for the people they want to be in power, so that these things they want done can be done. It's one of the most important things. And I must say that the question that is being asked by the persons about the demarcation board, it's important. It depends again on what kind of electoral systems we are going to look at. The demarcation board is going to be important, for instance, if we've got to do some demarcation or some constituencies. So, which is not something that I'm saying it will happen, but I'm saying I know that some people are making such suggestions. So the demarcation board will use it in the same way we are using the IEC also to give us some information about constituencies, to give us some information about how many South Africans are abroad, to deal again, like the point we're mentioning about prisons and so on, and also to help us with some of the calculations. So some of the institutions of our country, like the demarcation board and so on, are available to the panel, but they don't dictate to us. We still remain independent, but we work with them, and we will work with the demarcation board, especially if there is a requirement that there now must be some constituencies, and they must be designed to be smaller than the current ones that we have, which are a full province.
Thank you. I'm gonna come. I see you, Studuzo. I'm gonna just go to Lukona, who's on the webinar and has raised his hand to ask the question to whoever is asking the question to, and then I'll come to the other questions. I have noted you. Lukona, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mbali, and thank you to your guests, whom I must confess I have a degree of liking for both, just that they now find themselves in a pickle and crosshairs of some of us, because this is a very important discussion in terms of where the direction of our country is going. So I will spare the former member of the previous Ministerial Advisory Committee and and deal with the big brother advocate Sizani. And I mean, I get the point about the guiding principles that are often, you know, gazetted to us, and this panel has decided that there are 6 guiding principles advocate, which are inclusivity, fairness, accountability, simplicity, electoral manageability, and transparency. Now, that is well and good to me. However, my view is that electoral systems respond to a political moment, and you can find ways in which you decide for those principles, but there must be clarity about what is the political moment. And I think it's a bit unfair that politicians have effectively continuously given the burden post-1994 on the type of the electoral system to be advised by others and not politicians, because the 1994 system was a political pact, and the politicians took full responsibility of the system that they designed. And I wonder, how much are you willing to engage in a conversation about what is the political moment that faces South Africa? The fact that we are now on a 3rd electoral reform panel is quite clear indication that there is a grievance about the current system. And therefore, there is a need to pivot. But what is your understanding of the political moment and the evolution of politics in South Africa since 1994 that need us to contend with the electoral system? Because the electoral system is just for people to vote. But it's quite clear in my mind that we need to start there before we even get to the guiding principles. And how much of a conversation is being opened up amongst the members of the panel to grapple with the political moment and its understanding, but also just to say, if one is to make a submission outside of those guiding principles, how much will be taken into consideration about the nature of the political moment South Africa is in, and what is your view on that? And I don't want the advocate to say he can't be drawn into politics, because unfortunately, the electoral system is the biggest management system of politics in any country. Thanks, Mbali.
Mbali, should I come in?
Thanks, Lukona. You naughty, because you know that the advocate is on this call in a very neutral way, and this is why we also have Dr. Mbethe to give us the context of essentially what you're asking. But I will let the advocate, in his wisdom, answer how he wants to, knowing his particular role. And if Dr. Mbethe wants to give her inputs, then you can too, bearing in mind that we do have quite a few questions before we try to wrap up at 7:30. So I leave it in your hands, advocates.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important point, which I agree with my brother. I can really say that we are not running away from this issue, especially that we look at the political parties that are there in the country. Certainly, it cannot be said that it's not significant for a party that has fought for this country and has led it for the last 30 years, for it to drop from 57, when it was also in the 60s earlier, to 40, that must mean something. For some parties just to crop up and be that strong, it does mean there is something. The questions of collisions that are happening in the country and the way they are turning all over and so on. And one colleague was telling me, for instance, in local government, that they always say, okay, in Tswane now, a mayor will be there for 3 months. Then after 3 months, then let's look who else can take over. But what we have done to also look at the historical and political implications of our electoral system, we have really acquired a very senior professor, Professor Gwc Electoral, who is actually doing the politics of the electoral system of our country so that we can understand it, because it's also important. So we have not run away about that. There will be a paper that will come from us, which will analyze the moment we are in, whether we're in a tale of two cities or what is happening. But certainly, I agree with my brother. It's one of the things that we're going to take into account. The electoral system is part of the governance, is part of the constitutional system, is part of the politics of the country. You know, Mbali, just to finish off, it is, I mean, very interesting in South Africa. I mean, I've talked to old people, moved around the areas, and some of them say, we are not happy with this party, but you know, this was the party of my grandfather, and this was part of my thing. I can't go away about it. I might not even vote. And again, for instance, even if you just look at a funeral in this country, if you are in America, in between elections, you are a doctor, you are a professor, you are so-and-so, and then you are a Democrat or a Republican before that. But I can tell you, if Mbali, you are in a car accident here in this country, they'll say Mbali of this party is dead. If you are being given a position or a job in this country, first they will try and look which political party are you allocated, are you linked to. So there is really a lot of politicization, especially based on political party in our system. So it's matters that we should discuss and deal with them. So I agree with my brother. And we are doing a research by Professor Electoral to look at those elements and to how they affect our electoral system.
Thank you, advocates. Dr. Mbethe, there's some direct questions to you. The first one is, why would political parties, in your opinion, make wholesale changes that would get them out of power? And then in contrast, is it not a possibility that a first-past-the-post system would actually favor a party like the ANC to get back into power without coalitions? So that's the first one. And then the second one is, Dr. Mbethe, in your opinion, what would be the system changes that you would advocate for, essentially?
Okay. So the first, so to do those questions, yes, I mean, and this is, you know, when I said that it's very difficult to change electoral systems once they are going in a country, it's exactly because of that, because it's the turkeys voting for Christmas, right? The process of electoral system reform, the debate around it is political, because, you know, incumbents will want to make decisions that are in their favor. It's one of the things that's particularly interesting to me, though, about the ANC's resistance of first past the post voting, because numerically, as you say, that a first past the post system would favor a party like the ANC, and you see this at local government level, where we have a mixed system where half the seats in a council are ward seats and half the seats in the other half are PR closed list proportional representation seats, that like in a municipality like Johannesburg, for example, where there's 270 seats and 135 ward councillors, the vast majority of ward councillors, I think it's like 90 or so, of ward councillors are ANC councillors, because the vast majority of wards give the biggest chunk of the vote to the ANC. And so they, even when the ANC's overall share of the vote is falling, in a particular ward where it's a winner takes all, the ANC wins many of those ward elections. So a first past the post system at national level would probably, even now with the ANC support having dropped to below 50%, because remember, the point around a first past the post system is that you don't need to get over 50% to win. You need to get the majority of constituencies, and you can win constituencies without getting over 50% of the vote. So the ANC has been a very odd case of a political party that has not shifted this discussion in their interest in a narrow definition of their interests. I think that what the ANC has done is they've valued the centralized control of the party over its representatives and decided that's more important than winning the number of seats that you would win if they did have if we had a first past the post system. On the question of which is my preferred system, and Lukhona is going to disagree with me completely here, but this isn't a debate, so I can say what I want, is that I think that firstly, something to recognize, that first past the post systems are rare in the world. Only about 50 countries, 50 democracies use first past the post systems like Britain does, and most of those are former British colonies. So that's why a lot of countries in Africa, a lot of countries on the continent use first past the post systems, because they're an inheritance, a colonial inheritance. The majority of countries in the world use some version of a proportional representation system. Well over 70, 80 countries use some version of a proportional representation system. Now you've got different versions of PR system, and my preferred version of a PR system is actually the system they use in Ireland, which is a single transferable vote. So it's rank choice voting. And because it gives voters the most choice within a PR system. Yeah. Of course, that's also answered. Most political scientists like STV systems. Yeah. So it gives voters the most. The concern about it is that it's heavily complex, and that, but I don't think it's as complex as people make it out to be. Yeah.
Thank you. So, I mean, obviously, I can't give too much input on what I think because I'm trying to be a neutral facilitator. But I will say that in my former life, I was in a situation where I was in a party where SVT was very, very important, and there are pros and cons to it. And I think it's an interesting one, and I look forward to seeing Dr. Mbethe give her submissions to the panel.
It's a theoretical preference. I don't know if it's appropriate.
We must have these conversations in South Africa, because I don't even think a lot of people understand what even a SVT system is. So you and I, in this particular conversation in the country, Dr. Advocate Sizani and his panel are very much elite in terms of where we find ourselves in the conversations. So I love it, and I hope that we are going to have these conversations, and I hope that the advocate is going to invite us to some of the public hearings so that we can also be people that are just bringing in some different types of conversations that need to be had with South Africans, because I don't think that everyone understands the full imagination of what is possible and what has happened. So, I mean, Lukhona is saying now, I think there's a need for follow-up on the SVT, which there can be. there's so much teaching on this, and the levels of election literacy that we have must be more open. And Mbali, this one is on you next still. So what I think we must also do after this conversation, Mbethe, advocates and others, is that when you go out on the road, is that we must continue the education portion of this, because people must continuously know what is open. We have a couple of minutes left. I want to give you the ability to give your closing remarks. I do want to say that Abraham also sent a comment saying that accessibility should also be stressed as the cornerstone of the proposed electoral system and the guiding principle. And I think he's completely right, because I think, as Dr. Mbethe said, too many people feel that the process, all of them, are so far away from it. And certainly our research, our focus groups, our studies as Groundwork Collective, that's the same thing that we're hearing. For us, particularly from young people, they feel so alienated from the idea of what democracy is in South Africa. They know that they can vote at some stage, but they don't know how they can really participate. And this is a very important part of what we try to do, is we try to make sure that they understand where they can give their voices. So I'm going to ask for just a quick 1 minute from both of you to give us closing remarks. I will then just wrap up, and then this is going to be a conversation that I think we must take forward in the country. I see a lot of people from the media fraternity on some of our other channels, and what I hope that they're going to do, certainly is my thing, is that you need to spread this information. We've got another 10 days or 8 days before the submissions close, and I want to say that the fourth estate is as important as civil society and as parliament, and you have a real responsibility to make sure that people everywhere are understanding that they have an ability now to make their voices heard. So let me start with you, Dr. Mbethe, for a 1 minute close up, and then I'll go to the advocates before we close.
I just want to say thank you so much for creating this platform. You know, Mbali, they say no good deed goes unpunished. I think that you need to make this a weekly conversation. I think that we've only scratched the surface. And I think that even, you know, beyond the submission date of the 31st of October, engaging with the panel's work over time is something that we should be doing. And then that'll allow us to look at things like, you know, why can't we vote for the president directly, or we want to do that, what would it take to do that? All of those aspects that we weren't able to touch on today, I think that we should, you created the space, now you must continue with it. And thank you everyone for your engagement, and thanks Advocate Sizani, it's been really lovely.
Yeah.
Over to you, advocates.
Thank you very much, Mbali. Thanks, Mpemba. This has been very lovely. I really enjoyed it. Dr. Mbethe, thanks very much. You must come and work with us. Lukona Mnguni, please do have a roundtable with us. We're available for roundtables, and bring your issues. We will bring also our own top guns so that we can discuss and address some of the issues that you are raising. Finally, I must say, I hope South Africans can take electoral reform quite seriously. Done well, it can make this country happy. We can have development. We can have very qualified representative in parliament. Look what Kenya is doing, and the changes that it is making it in its own system, really here in Africa. And if we can have an electoral system that really makes people be capable, have qualities, and know why they are taking these jobs, and are held to account for that, it will be very important. But again, it's very important, if the electoral design is done badly, we can have corruption, we can have development that is not going anywhere, and again, we can have even civil war. So it's so important that people must participate. And thank you very much for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you so much to both of you. You've been excellent hosts. And I think that, as Dr. Mbethe says, we have to continue the conversations, and not just about this. I mean, we have so many others. The Municipal Structures Act, which is also going to hugely influence what everything looks like after our next local election. are things that we have to be speaking about. And I see various people, I can't see everyone, but I mean, I can see Kokombambo, Tuzama Njobe, Michael Atkins. These are all people that are intimately involved with the kind of work that is important for a fully functioning democratic society. So I'm excited to see them all on here. And I hope that beyond this, all of us can actually have a real conversation about how we're going to collaborate to make sure that this is something that is part of our political muscle memory, because I think what we need in South Africa more than anything is a change in the behavior that people understand where they are citizens and how they can contribute. So certainly from a groundwork collective position, this is the work that we'll continue to do. And we'll be working with the advocates, as panel, Dr. Mbethe and others, to continue this conversation and to really make sure that as much as possible, we take this to the whole country in all kinds of forms. So thank you for joining. We're going to end here. The recording will be live. We'll post the recording on our social media and all the different forums that you guys are all watching on. And I hope that you all are going to make your submissions. I see Zakira Vadi here also from Defend Our Democracy, and I know that they've been doing a lot of work on this. So I'm hoping that we all are going to make sure that we have real contributions for the advocate and his team to consider, and that we're going to, as Dr. Mbethe said, hold them to account and go to them. And, you know, advocates, I hope that you will also have, just like you do special forums for political parties, one for civil society that we can all sign up to and really make our voices heard in that particular platform.
Exactly.
Thank you, everyone. Yay, great. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone.
Bye.
Dr. Mbethe, we must meet where in Pretoria.
Why me no ngangoferisha ukuthi ngimithe na ngoba ngikhona lana nami? Awu. Bye, everyone.